Thank you very much, Marlene, for that introduction. And I want to tell you how excited I am to be back here, particularly in addition to the people that I met the last time. It was one of my early book club meetings. It was wonderful then, and it was particularly good because of this setting. I remember this very clearly with all the clear windows, and you're together, but you don't feel like you're closed in. I thought that was really neat. And the other thing is that this room was, last time I remember, I'd probably done, I don't know, 40 or 50 of these meetings since that time. But this one I remember because I could hear everybody in the room. And that's really important to me because I'm deaf as a hornet. And it really will help me when you ask questions and have comments, which I hope you will do, and I invite you to do, because that's where we can really get into those of you that, has anybody read the collectibles in this room? Has anyone read the concealers yet? No? Well, great, then I won't spoil anything. We really get into a discussion. But I ask you that, and mention that because as you talk to me and ask questions, please be sure to do what you can to project your voice so that I'll be able to hear you, and every word you say is important to me. So I'd like very much to have you do that, if you will, and make sure that I can hear you well. Yes, ma'am.
I wear hearing aids, and you're welcome to use one of them if you want.
That's a great example. I didn't hear a word of that. So, thank you for illustrating my point. Now ask me that again, would you?
I wear hearing aids, and you're more than welcome to borrow one.
Actually, I'm wearing a hearing aid in each ear. You just would never know it. I didn't know that I had a hearing problem until I was in law school. I went through high school, and in those days, a long time ago, in those days they had very few hearing tests. They only had one that I can remember in grade school, and they asked you to write the numbers in the third column, and then now write the numbers in the fourth column. And I looked around, and all my classmates were writing, and I wasn't, so I started writing. And that was the last hearing test I ever had, unfortunately. So I went to a hearing doctor for the first time in my life, Dr. Hoople in Syracuse, New York, and my mom went with me, and he examined me and then said to my mother, I stopped talking to me. One of the things that happens when you don't hear is they just, well, forget him. Just go over here, talk to this person. So he said to my mother, well, your son is profoundly deaf, and he might as well just forget about law school and try to get a job in the government. In those days, job in the government in those days was like, well, if you don't want to work hard, it's not terribly different. In any event, it was the first crisis I ever faced in my life, and I'd never had anything go really wrong. Quite the opposite. And college was dynamite, and I did all the things I wanted to do, and I loved the subjects I was in, and I loved the fraternity system in those days, and I mean, it was just all good. And here I was, and I liked law, and I liked law school, and I was having a problem hearing. So anyway, he fitted me to bilateral hearing aids. In those days, are big, thick things with batteries that big, wires down, implants in the ears, and you could hear the janitor on the third floor, but you couldn't hear the guy next to you. So, not really good acoustically. But anyway, I wore those, and I went to got into another law school, and thankfully, and they wanted me there. And so my law school career went really well after that, and in fact, I won all the moot court competitions locally, and so then I was able to compete in the national competitions. And I was proud of that. And so finally we had the final moot court competition. And Judge Francis Bergen, this was in New York State, Judge Francis Bergen, do you mind if I take this off? I'm sitting in front of a fire, standing in front of a fireplace here, warm, comfortable. Judge Bergen was the presiding justice of the New York Court of Appeals. In New York, that's the highest court. It's not called a Supreme Court. And he was the actual judge with two other judges in this moot court competition. And we were competing against top schools, and I think the final argument was between myself and our team and a team from Columbia Law School. And they went first, and then the final argument was up to me. And I stood up to the podium, and I had 50 those cards, you know, the little cards you write all the case stuff on. I had 50 of those, and I stood up, and I was just about to say, "May it please the court," and I heard this little thing in my radio go, zip, and the battery went dead. And then I just instinctively put my left hand up, and it went zip, and it went dead. And then I knocked all the cards off my podium, and there were 50 cards all over the floor. I thought, well, this is just a great start. And so I decided I couldn't bend down and try to pick up all these cards with the judges all just waiting. And I decided I can't hear, so the best thing I could do is just say, "I'm glad to be here." So I said, "May it please the court." And I went on with the argument. And about midway, as appellate courts are wont to do, they interrupt the lawyer and they ask very incisive questions, kind of like yours. "Can you hear? Do you need my hearing aids?" And so the judge asked me this question, and I didn't hear a word he said. It looked, to me, it was like, and I said, well, I answered the question I thought he should have asked me. So I answered that question, and then he went on, and then 2 or 3, I continued with my argument, and I had remembered the cases, so I didn't worry about that part. And I was really into it. But then another judge asked me a question. I could hear him saying something, but so again, I answered the question I thought he should have asked. So I finally finished, and we ended the argument, and I went back and sat down, and my team, the dean of our law school, was sitting next to me, and then all these other people. My mom was in the back of the room before I got married. And I thought I just completely ruined everything for my law school. And so we went to the awards dinner that night, and I sat in the back of the room, and the judge got up, and the presiding justice got up on the stage, and he went through all the ceremony, and then he said, "Now I want to present the America's Silver Cup, the American Trial Lawyer's Silver Cup, to the best oral argument." And he announced the winner, and the dean kept poking me and said, go up there. And I said, "It's not funny. It's not funny. You are the one." I said, "Stop it." He said, "Jim, go on the stage." So I said, I couldn't believe him. So I go up there, and Judge Bergen shakes my hand, and I'm in front of all these people, and he said, "This young man is just going to be some lawyer. I've had a lot of experience with appellate arguments, but this young man, when he answered the questions, it was as if he just ignored mine and wanted to go on with what he thought he should do." And I'm saying to myself, I'll be a good lawyer. I'm a fraud, you know? What am I doing here? So that's how I started my career. Anyway, that's the explanation about hearing it. I would like very much to answer your questions. You've read this book. Apparently you've read The Concealers, and you've read The Collectibles. Let me say, before we start, that you know, the last time I was here, I don't know if you remember, the last time I was here, this went so fast, and I was having so much fun. You said to me, "You know, Mr. Kaufman, we're going to have lunch now." And I thought, it's only been 10 minutes. You said, "No, it's 2 hours." You remember that? Anyway, the thing I want to mention about the book is that the Collectibles, I'm pleased, has done as well as it has. And it's won a bunch of awards, as you said, and it's gotten wonderful reviews and so on, which I'm very grateful for. But the thing that meant the most to me in this whole process has been the fact that once a week or so I get a letter from a man or woman across the country whom I don't know saying, this book has affected the way I look at life. This book has changed my life. And I I can't thank you enough. Now, they don't write to me when they do this. They write to this website, and they don't know that I'm getting this email, but I answer it within 5 minutes, every one of them. And there's been over 100 some. Because I'm so grateful that somebody would take the time to write to me and tell me how they feel about it. And that has meant a lot. And in the process of that experience, so many people have said, either in reviews or in writing me, that they can't wait for another book. They want to know about what happened to the collectibles. And that's where I got the idea of writing a trilogy. The problem was I'd never written a trilogy, and I didn't know how to write a trilogy, and this was my first book. So I had to figure out, how do you write a trilogy? And I did my best to understand the arc of a trilogy in the first book and book 2 and book 3 and how it would work. And you'll be the judge ultimately, not me, about whether I've succeeded in my goal. But I hope that book 2, and it'll be interesting to hear your remarks really about whether book 2, how you felt about it, particularly if you've read book 1, and how you felt about it in terms of the arc of that story and what really has happened to Preston and what kind of a role he sees himself playing in his future as contrasted with what he perhaps should be doing in his future. When I ended the collectibles, and that last line about that son of a bitch on the 6th collectible, I had one reviewer write me, wrote a 5-star review. He said, the only thing is, I don't know why he had to use that language. And one of the things that I decided to do with book 2 is to try to tamper the, you may have noticed it's a lot less, the dialogue's just a little bit toned down from the first book. And that was done intentionally because I think I got carried away in the first book of the way, perhaps the way I thought the characters would talk. Was it really necessary for them to talk that way? It's kind of interesting, an evolution that you go through in that regard. But the real question was, and the reason I had Preston use those words is because to him, he viewed himself differently than all the other collectibles. And to him, it was they, and then I'm one of them. And the whole question I wanted to put to my readers in book 2 is it a them and us kind of thing, a they, or is it really a question of underlying values over here versus perhaps a different set of values over there? You know, the collectibles, the theme was not about control or money, but about extensions of the heart. In the concealers, the concealers asks a different question. It asks, how relevant is the truth today? So why don't I stop there? And I hope you'll have some questions, and we'll, if that's all right with you, Marlene, to proceed in that. Okay. Do you have any questions or what comments? Yeah.
Well, first I want to tell you, gee golly, I'm the 6th, just wouldn't have cut it.
Yeah.
When, being it's a trilogy, when you were writing the collectibles, did you have the whole story in your mind of what book 2 would be like and book 3?
It's a good question. The truth is, I didn't know I was going to write book 2 and 3. When I wrote the first book, my goal was to try to write a novel with a beginning, a middle, and an end that would be at least accepted as a decent first try. I'd never written a novel, written other books, not a novel. I didn't know how to write a novel. I didn't didn't take creative writing in college, and I didn't do all the things that good writers do to get ready to go on with their careers. So I had no idea whether my first novel would be, all I knew is I wanted it to be what I wanted it to be, but I didn't know if readers would find it and feel about it the same way I did. It took me 3.5 years to write the first book. And I had the story in my mind for 10 years. But I learned early on that I can't do 2 things at once well like women can and my wife can. I can't do that too well. And I certainly can't do work and strategic turnarounds and that kind of detailed corporate work, banking, and then the next minute write fiction. Because they're really 2 different sides of up here, and the approach is different. So it's a long-winded answer. I apologize for that. But the answer is that I didn't think of it at that time, and B, what I did think of was I thought of the collectibles concept as a whole story. What I hadn't counted on when I started was that the story would go on. It would continue, and that my readers would want to know. And the thing that I'm so grateful for about the collectibles in its reception is that my readers saw the two things. They saw the characters as they really are, and they identified with the characters, I hope, and they've told me they have. And the other thing was, they understood that I was writing from something that to me was the truth. And what I've learned about writing is that if you don't write from here, you can forget here. And you have to tell the truth. And I tried to do that in the first book, and I think I did. And so that's what fueled the arc of the second book. The demand for the going on, and then stepping back, looking at the collectibles and what do we know about them today. And then I realized that I really had left the question of Preston's redemption open in the first book, but it had to end someplace. And so then what dawned on me very deeply, I mean, it wasn't an epiphany, it just assembled all the thought that went into that, was there is another story here. There's a much larger story, and if I can dial into that and talk about the collectibles, but at the same time have that dynamic between Preston, does he or doesn't he fulfill his promise? Yes, ma'am.
Once you decided upon a second book, what made you make it a trilogy instead of just a sequel?
Tell me again.
Once you decided upon a sequel, what made it a trilogy instead of just a second
That's a
book?
good question. I think that's really a good question. I think the reason I thought about a trilogy is because I had so much to build in the second book about bringing more of the collectibles to you than I had in the first book. I mean, you met Harry Koslowski, but you didn't really know him. He didn't show up a lot. You saw Tommy and Missy, but then what did they do with their lives? And then I realized if I developed all of that and was only the second book, then I would be involved in a sequel or a series. And I didn't have a character that at that time was a series kind of character. If you take, Stone Barrington in the Woods novels, or Reacher, they're set up for a series, but I didn't have that. So I thought, well, if I introduce a new character in the Concealers, and one that I could really believe in, then I could have the third book in the trilogy finish the trilogy, but have Catherine, in this case, go forward. That's the answer to that question. And when developing Catherine, the first book had I hope I was in the female mind when I wrote about Missy and Alice and all the women in the first book, because I think in the first book the women are silently behind the men, but a moving force. I mean, it was Missy that told Preston to get over himself. So, but then in book two, when I came up with Catherine, she's a 23-year-old woman. I went to our daughter Christine, and I asked her, can you help me, tell me or direct me where I might go? You can be warm, you can come up here. You want to, could you help direct me to how I can get inside a woman's mind, state of mind? Now, I've been married 47 years, so, and I understand my wife as much as I can, and I'm delighted, I mean, just delighted that, I don't know, I can't tell you how grateful I am that I am married to this woman for 47 years, and what a great part of my life she has been and is. But getting back to the woman's frame of mind, I said to Christine, how can I do this? She gave me 4 or 5 books about fathers and daughters and all this other stuff. We'd gotten along very, very well in all those years, so wasn't that kind of an issue. But I wanted to get beyond the men are from Mars and Venus, whatever it is. I wanted to get beyond the question of the Covey signals that you earn, and the woman calls her husband and says, we've got a fire in the kitchen. The husband says, well, get a fire extinguisher, put it out. And she says, I did all of that. I just wanted you to know. There's that disconnect between women and men. So, but I wanted to go deeper than that. So I did study all these books, and I really was fascinating to find how deep it gets with women. I was fascinated why women can multitask better than men, and why women can listen better than men. I mean, you really can. And it just if anything's been, don't get mad at me, guys. I said that one time. I said that one time, and actually the Players Club. I was talking to a couple of guys, and I made that comment, and the guy said, "What's the problem with you?" I mean, but truly, we have to give ourselves permission to really talk to people and tell you what we really feel, because it's not the way we're accustomed to talking to one another. But women know much more about really listening comprehensively. And when they come to a book club and they've written stuff on the sides and they're really into it. So I got into all of that psychology, and also the psychology of in your brains. You have to know when an infant is 1 year old and can't tell you that he's hungry or he's tired or he's that's his diapers changed. He cries, you know why he's crying. And you give it to your husband, he goes, well, I don't know, you take him. I mean, it's just, I don't know why he's crying. And because you have wired in there genetically the proclivity to be able to understand through body language what the infant's saying without hearing the words. And what that showed me was that you have much more acuity in the visual signals as well as the audio signals. So if we go to a meeting sometime and the husband and wife are standing together, and the husband comes home and says, gee, I thought that guy was really good. I liked what he said. And the wife might say, or the woman might say, yeah, I liked what he said, but I don't know about him. And why is that? And then it comes out, well, women's intuition, but it's deeper than that. It's a question of you're seeing signals, like, a woman just touching the back of her neck, or this is certain little things that you're picking up on that men kind of miss, and they're looking for the big picture and all that kind of stuff. So I tried to get into all of that in the character of looking at the world through the eyes of Catherine, a 23-year-old journalist. And then the difference between that and a 50 or 40 or 50-year-old woman, or her mother's age, and then the dynamic that went on between Catherine and her mom, because her mom told her a fundamental lie, but she had good reason to do it. And so, you have to weigh that. And it was interesting. I had one of my reader group. I'm blessed to have a wonderful reader group. And one of my reader group, early on, a woman who I know very well, said to me, I said, I don't like to talk about it until she's read it. I just was with her one night, and she said, I said, how's it going? And she said, well, I'm really having a problem with Catherine. And I said, well, tell me about that. And she said, I just don't think she's giving her mother any slack, and I just think she's being awful to her mom, and I don't like it. I said, well, I'm glad you feel that way. I was, because I was at that point I wanted her to feel that way. But what I was hoping is that by the end of the book, she would be able to see, after all, at 23, that book's span was 6 months. So, if you were 23 and you found out that your dad didn't die in the Air Force, and that all that you constructed about him, hypothetically, that you could live with and feel good about, it's gone, and then you're left with, well, who is my father? And then you find out, well, you finally find out, I have a father, but I don't know whether I like that fact or not. I'm 23, I've gone this far with my mom, we've made it together. Do I really need a father? But it'd be kind of nice to have a father. So you get into all of that back and forth, that's really the point of view I wanted to try to achieve, that a 70 or 60 or 50 or 40-year-old woman is going to look at life in the sum total of all you've experienced, and a 23-year-old, if you can remember, will look at it with the attitudes of a 23-year-old, as bright as she is. So that's the difference. I'll keep quiet and answer. Well, yes?
I have a question. I didn't, did you cover how Haley, how Catherine is so dependent on Haley?
I read that in your review. I know.
I kept looking to see why she wasn't in the service or anything, like she had PTSD or... No,
you're right. You're right. I was fascinated that you mentioned that in your review. Thank God you still put 5 stars on it. That was good. But I was worried when I read it and said, what's the story with Catherine and Haley? She's got this fixation about a dog. I will say that, I'll say that the answer is that, first of all, I'm encumbered by being a hopeless dog lover. Okay, if you feel the way I do, I've had we've had dogs forever, but I had a German Shepherd who was the focal point of Buck in the Collectibles, and he was 140 pounds. Patty says he started at 125. Every time I tell this story, he gets bigger. Anyway, it's. I still think he was 140 pounds. It's kind of like fishing, but and he was a working shepherd. We had a farm with 150 acres, and I'd cut all the timber heated our house for 20 years. We're out there working, and Duke would actually be able to hold the line. You can either put a chip in a tree and get it to fall over so it won't bind on the saw, but you also could hold it, and he was strong enough to hold that while I would cut the timber, and then go over and pick the logs up and put them in the... when you have a dog, a working shepherd that's as intelligent as Buck was, and his name was Duke in reality, and they look at you with the ears go up, and dogs, and they're, why aren't you getting the door, Jim? They're looking at you, and so, sorry. So you get into these dogs, and then when Duke finally left me, he was like 14 or so, and I'd called our vet and said the time's going to come when Duke's going to go, and I want to know if I could ask you to come to my house and do what you have to do, and we'll just do it right there. And so he did all of that, and I'd called him when the time was, and I cooked Duke a big steak and had the steak, and then I had held him in my arms. If you feel about dogs the way I do, then you could understand why I went overboard with that. And Charlie was in the back of that book, and both of them. He was, we just lost Charlie. I just lost Charlie last December. But he was not only, I won't make this whole thing about dogs, but he was a hearing dog, and I didn't train him as a hearing dog. He was just so bonded with me and so intelligent that he became a hearing dog. And he saved my life more than once. Literally. I'm involved in boating, and I took Charlie down in my boat down the coast to Miami one time, and we stayed at the Miami Marina, and I walked with him to the marine store, and went under an underpass. Miami Beach is a little overpass, and I went under that, the marine store, and I was coming back, and Charlie stood in front of me and almost fell over him, and then I turned this way, he did the same thing. Charlie, what are you doing? And then there was a welder up there that I didn't see or smell, and he didn't have barricades, and hot steel was falling down, burning hot, and was going right where I was going to step. And that would have just been, real problem. And then we got over that, and I stayed at the Hyatt Regency, I think it was the Hyatt, I think it's the Hyatt Hotel in Coral Gables, very, very nice hotel. And I went in with Charlie, and the woman said very politely, we don't allow any pets here. And I said, he's a hearing dog. Oh, okay. Well, and there are rules where you can't. So I took Charlie, and we went up and we spent the night. When I take my hearing aids off, I'm done. Take them out, done, and I can't sleep with him in. So I took him out, and I go to bed, and it's about 3 in the morning, and Charlie comes over, if you don't mind, he just grabs me right here on my arm like this. And he normally would just go like that, or just lick my thing, grabs me like this, and put pressure, and I woke up, and he took me, I mean, I followed him, this big dog also, 140 pounds. He comes over, and we get to the door, and I open the door, and there's smoke everywhere. And the alarms are going off, and I go down to the stairway with Charlie. I'm in my pajamas, and I go down to the stairway, and we go down, I don't know how many, 8, 10 floors, whatever it was. And the entire lobby was filled with people, and the firemen were everywhere, and they just hadn't gotten to my room. And there was an actual fire below us, so he saved my life. So I got to tell you, dogs, a little overboard, but I love them.
What's the relationship, for lack of a better term, between you and Joe? Because when I read the back cover and what you did, an attorney, helping businesses turn around, the dog, I said, wow, I wonder where Joe comes into your life.
Yeah, that's a good question, and it's a familiar question because before I answer that question, I want to digress one moment. I had all these book clubs across the country now by Skype, and they all have been just wonderful. I mean, I finished with, in the beginning I was worried that maybe it wouldn't work because maybe I wouldn't be able to hear the ladies and the men in the room, maybe I wouldn't be able to see them. And the first Skype we did, a group out in California, and they were 5:30, it was 8:30 my time, turned the switch, and I'm not the most competent guy technically, and I finally there's the screen, and there were 10 women, they all had wine glasses. Hi, Mr. Kaufman. I thought, wow, this is going to be fine, this is going to work out fine. But the question I'm asked probably the most is, are you Joe? The answer is a little. Not a lot, not completely, but I would say this: Joe's a hypothetical composite creation in my head. He's an ideal. When I wrote Joe, I wrote him to have unapologetic, inherent goodness. Now, today's novels, it's very important to be successful if the author makes his protagonist flawed in a number of ways. And the last thing in the world the reading public wants is a good guy. But I want a good guy. Not for me, but for us. Because I believe that we have enough writers writing why all lawyers are bad, all the doctors are in your back pocket for money, all the insurance companies corrupt. I mean, you go down the list of the popular fiction today, and it all is about what's wrong with everybody and how bad they are. And I wanted to say, I practice law, and I loved the practice of law. I loved every minute that I was a lawyer, and I loved every minute I was a judge, 14 years. And I loved when I ran a $900 million boating company in North America. I loved being a CEO. I liked being a chairman. I like doing it right now, and being the chairman of Imaging the World, because it's really doing good as well. I love all that stuff. But that's not bad stuff. That's good. It's good to let people know that Imaging the World is saving lives. 25% of the women, roughly, in Uganda at childbirth die. And with this ultrasound diagnostic, we can do a material advance to save their lives and the lives of the children. And so that's all good stuff. And what's wrong with saying that? That's why I worked it into the concealers with one line or two, just because I think we have enough bad. Now, you can, obviously, fiction has to have conflict. And without it, we have nothing. So you want to have conflict. But we could still do it. Now, back to Joe. I think that if he were going to live on, you would see his flaws anyway. He had flaws. I suggested that he was too close to his men when he ran the submarine stuff, and that's why he wasn't promoted. I just didn't go overboard with dealing. I could have had him when Ashley was killed. He could have gone out and had a subplot to kill the kid that killed Ashley. But that actually was an experience I had as an attorney. I had a client who was paralyzed, paraplegic, because of a random shooting. Right? That really happened. And so these things happen, and I don't think we need to dwell on the bad side of it. So the things Joe did, the boating, I did all that stuff. The wilderness stuff in the Adirondacks, I've done that, all of it. The strategic turnaround plans, I wrote that from my own knowledge base. So all that stuff is clearly stuff I've done, and that's why I was able to write about it without researching it and still have it be, hopefully you would feel when you read it that it was real and it was true. If I were asked to speak to this group about a subject I don't know, and there are lots of them, I'd be a nervous wreck up here. I mean, I could never stand here and talk to you about what I don't know. I just have to write and talk about something I do know, or else I shouldn't be up here. So in that respect, Joe's similarities were there. However, there's a lot of things that Joe did on the other side that is not me. And it may be, I'd like to be as good as Joe was. I think if I lost my wife, I would have killed the other guy. I mean, I don't know that really, but I'm just saying he was an ideal. I mean, people you have to ask yourself how far you're willing to go with a commitment that you make, whether it's to somebody living or somebody not living. Does the commitment survive? And for whom are you making the commitment? Are you making it for yourself, or are you making it for the other person? I mean, the only reason Preston originally went along with fulfilling an unspecified commitment in the future is because he felt he didn't have any choice. And he thought, I don't like being boxed in, but maybe there's some wiggle room at the other end. Maybe I can figure out a way I'll do it. I'll say I'm going to do it. Well, is that enough? Or does it matter, and we'll get into book 3, whether he really has fulfilled his commitment? Does it matter to someone else, or does it matter to him? And those are the questions I think we have to ask ourselves, and that's why I started this conversation with, is the truth relevant today? And does the truth still matter today? I mean, all you have to do is watch television or read the news any day you want to pick, today included. And what do you see? And this isn't about politics. I'm not going to say a word about politics or parties or anything else, but just look at the totality of it and ask yourself, any concealment going on? Is everybody really being candid, straightforward? Is this what I feel? What do you feel? Are the people in conflict talking with one another honestly about, or are they politically leveraging their position so they can work it around and then get the right point and get what they want? I mean, these questions go on every single day. So I believe that the Concealers, I'd like to believe, is a very relevant novel right now. And therefore, I'm hopeful that when I get to book 3, I'll put this thing to bed in a way that will completely answer to the best of my ability all those inherent questions about what that arc is and what really matters in that regard. Yes, ma'am.
So, still staying with Joe, I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
You as a writer, do you struggle with a particular character? Joe is a perfect example. Do you, as you are writing, do you struggle with, well, if I keep Joe alive, this is what will happen, and this will be the interpretation? Or if Joe dies, then this will happen? Or is it more that you write the story, and then you get all done, and you think to yourself, oh, there's a subtle little innuendo there that I didn't realize I was injecting? I want to know the process of how you decide what you're going to have a particular character do.
Will you keep it a secret?
Yes.
The answer is all of those things. because when I thought about Joe, I knew I wanted to have Joe die. When I thought of the story originally, I wanted to have Joe die because I felt that I wanted the experience that I really wanted to deal with the issue of what happens when a man knows or a woman knows he's going to die earlier than we all know we're going to die. What happens? And that subject matter fascinates me and did all along because, you know, I'm trustee in a lot of estates and handled a lot of, you know, the legal side of that whole arena. Then I watched what happens when your client does die. And I mean, when I was just starting to practice, I had a neighbor who was a very vibrant guy, and sales manager kind of guy. Everybody loved him, and he came to me, and I just started my practice, and he said, this is after I left Washington and working in the house and so on, and started private practice. And he said, would you draw my will? And I said, sure. And he said, well, I'd like you to be trustee in my estate. I said, fine. And I said, why don't you pick a bank, though? I mean, they have more experience and all. He said, well, then you pick a bank, but you be the main trustee. I said, okay. And then he told me what he wanted me to do with his will and so on, and I wrote it that way. And then 1 week later, he was dead, gone. And, you know, so all of a sudden, I was the trustee of this estate and responsible for his wife and his children and all the things I'd drawn a week earlier, but had zero experience in actually doing. And so that was my first trusteeship, and I dealt with the wife, and then when the wife was married, and the children, what the children did, and all that kind of stuff. But what I realized was how much we have to understand that life is here today, and that we have to live it that way, because we really don't know whether I'll be here tomorrow. And so the whole key to it, or the beauty of it, is fully understanding that. So with that in mind, I knew I wanted Joe to go through that, and I wanted to be able to write about what I've experienced with many people in my life that have died and going through death. And it's obviously uncomfortable, it's obviously difficult, but if it's done right, there's a dignity to it. And so the question was, how could I deal with that? And I thought Joe would be a vehicle. Now, what I didn't count on was having Ashley die. When I wrote the book in the first place, Ashley was right by Joe's side, and right through the whole thing, because that's been my frame of reference. But then I thought about, you know, no one will understand Joe Hart the way I want them to understand Joe Hart without having Joe lose his wife. Because losing his wife was, to me, the most horrific thing I could think of for myself. I just couldn't imagine it. So the one thing about fiction is you can go where you can't go in nonfiction. So that's why I decided to have Ashley killed. And when I first wrote the book, that was not even that way. The other answer to the part of your question that I'm sensing underneath it is, what do you do with these characters? Do you have them all idealized as to where you're going with them? Is it an outline? That's what you're really asking me, right? And I think, for me, there's no outline. I get up in the morning, feet hit the floor, get in the shower, and I'm hearing dialogue. And then I stay in the shower, and I stay in the shower. And then my wife wonders, when is he going to get out of the shower? You know, so, but that's what goes on. And then when I'm writing, and I sit down with somebody as good as Debbie is, to be able to really stay with me. And I can't type well to begin with, and I've tried it longhand, and it doesn't work. So the only way I can write is to dictate, because I have to tell the story. And then I have to listen to what I've said, and then see what it said, and then say, oh, that's what I wanted to say, or not. So the way I do it is I have in my office, I have these two big screens, and Debbie would sit here looking ahead at her screen, and I'm not looking at her, and then this big desk, and I'm over here looking at my screen. So I'm trying to divorce myself from anybody being in that room, and no phone calls or anything, and now I'm just telling this story. And I remember when I wrote the Collectibles, and I got to the last chapter, and I'm trying to dictate it, but tears are getting in my eyes, and I'm getting choked up, and I'm not doing very well. And I finally looked down, and I realized that there hasn't been any typing on the screen for 10 minutes. So I look over at my secretary, and she said, "Just leave me alone, you know." so you know, it's just that's the perils of dictation, you know. And the other thing is that when I'm writing these characters, I don't always know what they're going to say. I mean, I know what I thought they were going to say, but when I get in their mind, like Tommy Greco, I just love Tommy Greco. He's listening to Preston, and I've met a lot of all my characters I've met. I know these people. I know you know them. You know what they're going to think, and Preston's going on and on with Tommy and his in Preston's mindset, and then Tommy's looking at him. You could just see this guy, and it's you know the dialogue. And so once I get into to Tommy's head, then the stuff I really want to say I can't say in the book a lot. I mean, really, he would say, because I don't want the book to be vulgar, and I don't want it to have profanity, and there's got to be another way of saying it. But if you can find the other way of saying it, you can put the same feeling across. Now I'm in Tommy's head, and that scene in the Concealers where Preston comes out to meet with Missy again and Tommy, and he's just oblivious to the fact that Missy's pregnant. He doesn't pick it up at all. Tommy's trying to tell him, no cigar and all this stuff, because Preston's saying, I'm gonna bond with Tommy, we're gonna have cigars together and all this kind of stuff. But Tommy's in a different place now. He's got a wife and she's pregnant, and you know, dual protective and right over Preston's head, right? So the dialogue in that was more driven by those circumstances than it was anything I had in mind of how far it goes and so forth. So that's how that worked. Yeah.
Mr. Kaufman, I think if you want to sign some books, you could.
Enough?
Yeah.
Okay. Happened to me again. I want to thank you for listening to all my stuff. And yes, ma'am.
One question. I did read the first book, Collectibles, loved it. I can't remember the relationship with Austin, because he's let Austin take over in the office and he let Casey go.
Austin?
Austin.
Oh, the
accountant, the head accountant.
Yeah, he's in trouble.
He's got the company in trouble.
I'm missing something here.
Dixley?
Dixley.
Higsley, Austin Higsley.
The guy that's gotten the company in trouble. He was not in the first book.
Oh, you mean in the second book?
Yeah, but he went to school with him.
Oh,
That's
yeah.
why he's so connected
Disley.
to him. Yeah,
Yeah.
Higsley.
Yeah.
What was the question
The
about?
question is, why would he let Austin, why would he believe him over Casey when Casey's trying to tell him that he's
Yeah.
doing things with the company?
So is your question, why would Preston have had his friend do that, or why didn't he have oversight, or?
I guess what I'm trying to say is why Casey had been there so long, and.
Why did he pick him over Casey?
Yeah.
Ah, well.
Is that to be continued?
Yeah. Good time to stop now, and we'll have lunch. And I really like to duck that because it's so inherent in book 3. And Casey, I'll just give you an intentionally short answer. It had to be that way. It had to be that way because Casey's a phenomenal character, and he's going to come back in book 3 in a way that just really something. and so when he does that, then you'll see, and I just don't want to spoil it, but that's the deal.
Do you have a title for book 3?
I do. Yeah, I definitely do. All I'll say is, it's going to have the, and it's going to start with a C and an O. So I got to- Well, thank you so much.